Welcome to this episode of the Catechetical Corner, handing on and defending the faith. In St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, he lays the groundwork for the mystical marriage of the eternal bridegroom, Jesus Christ, and his bride, the Catholic Church, through the visible sign of that invisible reality found in the indissolubility of holy matrimony. An ordered spiritual hierarchy is intentionally designed in the masculinity and femininity of each person to bring into the world the reality of the self-giving love that is eternally generating life within the Holy Trinity. Being subject to one another in fear of Christ, let women be subject to their husbands as to the Lord, because the husband is the head of his wife, as Christ is the head of the church. He is Savior of his body. Therefore, as the church is subject to Christ, so also let wives be to their husbands in all things. In this episode, the teachings of St. Pope John Paul II on the nature of the human person, its inherent dignity and integrity in being created in the image and likeness of God, and the role of men in that equation are brought into full view through the lens of the theology of the body, an authentic expression of Christian fatherhood. Well, thank you all for being here today and giving me an opportunity to share a little bit about theology of the body with you. This is a really in-depth teaching. I can't do it justice in just an hour. So what I'm hoping to do today is just give you a little taste of what it's all about, and also witness a little bit to you about the impact it's had on my life as a man, as a husband, and as a father. I taught for 17 years. Of those 17 years, 11 of them were spent at St. Thomas More Catholic High School. I started out in a civics classroom and an American history classroom. My degrees in secondary education, social studies. And I taught those subjects for a really long time. And I'll allude a little bit to what happened in my family and what really happened that transformed me. And that transformation was one that was an internal one that has slowly become external. But in the middle of my journey at STM, my wife and I found out in the midst of our second pregnancy that our second child was diagnosed with a birth defect so severe that 80% of the couples who received the diagnosis we did at that point in the pregnancy choose abortion. And my wife and I chose to pray for a miracle. St. Thomas More Catholic High School, the faculty, staff, students, and parents, they became, if you can relate the analogy, my Simon of Cyrene. As I walked my Paschal mystery. And the beautiful thing about being a man in the Catholic Church, and the things I'm going to talk about today, is that God is calling each one of you in here through a Paschal mystery. And there's no Easter Sunday in your life without a Good Friday. And if you don't embrace Good Friday in your life, you'll get bitter, angry, resentful, pessimistic. But if you embrace those things with Jesus Christ, he can take what the world says is a tragedy and turn it into a triumph. And I'm standing here today because I really learned what real love is all about, what it means to be a real man, an authentic man. And I'm not just going to tell you that you should do that today. I want to give you some practical ways to actually start doing that. And theology of the body has a lot to do with that. And I was a pretty typical guy growing up in Southwest Louisiana. I was a Catholic. I grew up here, pretty nominal Catholic for most of my life, until I embarked on that journey at STM, and I befriended some men and a priest, God rest his soul, Father Joe Bro. He invited me to his home once a month with all these other young men my age for fellowship, prayer, and growth in our personal friendship with Christ. And as I was embarking on that and growing in Christ with those men who had something I obviously did not have, but I wanted. And you can't give what you don't have, and you can't love what you don't know. And it was the first authentic male friendships that I had in my life where I looked at men and I said, that guy is a guy and he's in love with Jesus Christ, and it's not effeminate. And I'm going to talk to you about effeminacy, the one that St. Thomas Aquinas alludes to in the Summa Theologia. He's not talking about a guy who has girl qualities or feminine qualities. He's talking about a deficiency, a disorder we have in our concupiscence, in our fallen nature, in our humanity, where we have a tendency to be addicted to pleasure, and we refuse to do difficult things because we'd rather seek pleasure. And that's the thing that a lot of men dealt with, the thing I dealt with in my life until my son came along. And it was challenging, but you know what? I saw these men, and they were not willing to not do difficult things to seek out pleasure, and they were willing to challenge me on difficult topics at moments in my life when I needed it the most. Those men are still today my best friends. You probably know some of them. Jeff Cormier, he's the head of the religion department at St. Thomas More. John Listy, who used to be the campus minister at St. Thomas More Catholic High School. Lance Strother, who is the campus minister today at St. Thomas More Catholic High School. Shane Savoy, who I think is the offensive coordinator for the St. Thomas More Catholic High School football team, and he teaches at the school. David Thompson, who's still a math teacher there. These men, all of them, in the absence now of Father Joe, are still the men I surround myself with whenever I need to go to other men to grow in my faith and to be held accountable. And they are the first virtuous friendships I've had in my life, where we're not seeking anything for one another other than what the greatest good is, which is to be with Jesus Christ face to face for all eternity in heaven. And to seek the good. Not do what we want to do, but do what the right thing to do is. So I was at STM for a while, and then I moved from STM to Catholic High. When I went to Catholic High for a couple of years in the theology department, I was able to teach Christology, ecclesiology, social justice, and what I'm going to speak to you about today, theology of the body. I was at Reds the other morning. Maybe some of you have seen me there. I go there early in the morning during the week. Get there at 4:30 and walk out around 6 at least 2 or 3 times a week. And I have some equipment at home on the days when I can't make it there. But there was a young man I taught this subject to at Reds. I see him there all the time. He invited me to his wedding. He's about to get married. He's about 24, 25 years old. And he told me the other morning when I was working out with him, Coach, if I'd have not had your class at Catholic High, I wouldn't be getting married right now. And it was about this. And I think the big misconception about theology of the body is that when people hear it, whether it's a parent who's a mother or a father, it's like, oh goodness, that's a Catholic talk about sex. Nothing could be further from the truth. We're in an identity crisis in this world. People don't know who they are. Men want to use women's bathrooms and vice versa. Theology of the body is an adequate anthropology, which means it's an adequate explanation of what it means to be human. And we have completely forgotten that. We don't know what it means to be human. Take a look at the way we treat one another, on and offline. And you can see very quickly that we have forgotten what it means to be created in the image and likeness of God. So as a man, I'm going to say to you, one of the most influential popes in my life was Saint Pope John Paul II. And as I got to know more about him, unfortunately, after he'd already passed away and missed most of my opportunity of my life as a Catholic to be influenced by him, and I had a chance to teach theology of the body and have it impact my marriage directly. And that's how I'm going to end the talk today, to give you a little witness about how it impacted my marriage directly. I learned a lot about what it means to be a real man. And one of the books, you know, I used to say when I taught American history and civics that the Declaration of Independence was the blueprint for the Constitution. There's a blueprint for theology of the body. It's a deep philosophical study of the human person. And I'm going to give you a little taste of it today. But if you really want to get a grip on it, there's 2 books that you could look at. I would not try to tackle Love and Responsibility because it's really in-depth philosophical work, and if you don't have any background in philosophy, it might be kind of hard to understand. But a practical book you and your bride could journey through together this Lent is by Dr. Edward Shree. It's called Men, Women, and the Mystery of Love. And it's a breakdown of the philosophy that John Paul II espoused on in Love and Responsibility. And it's at a layman's level. You can read it, and it's really applicable. And it's really great because it talks about ways you can grow as a husband and a wife and a way to show authentic love to one another. And I'll get in a little bit more of that later on. One of the things that really hit me in this particular book is something that John Paul II called the personalistic norm. If you know anything about Karol Wojtyła's life, he grew up in Poland And at the time when he was growing up, the first part of his life was under occupied Nazi Germany during World War II. And the second part of his life was occupied, before he became Pope, under communist Soviet Union, where people are objects to be used instead of people to be loved. They are a cog in the wheel. Their value comes only from what they can do, not from who they are. So he defines the opposite of love as not hate, but use. And that is pretty much the basis for what he's talking about when it comes to how we see other people and how we treat other people. Do we see them as a gift to be given and a gift to be received? Or do we see them as something to be used for our personal gain? A person in their human nature should never, ever, ever be the end. Never be the means to an end. They should always be the end. And oftentimes, in the culture that we live in today, we tend to love things and use people instead of loving people and using things. And just because you're not a woman, men do this as well. And I think everybody in here would know, whether it's physical or not, you know when you're being used and it doesn't feel good. Nobody likes it. And if you really love people for who they are, because they're in the image and likeness of God, you won't use them, you'll love them. You'll choose to will their good for their good over your own. Because real love's not a feeling. My son taught me that. It's a decision. And too often we don't hear that enough. Because we're caught up in empty sentimentality and emotional overtones in our society today. So what is theology of the body? Well, first of all, it's about 129 short talks given by Pope St. John Paul II between the time he entered his pontificate in 1979 through 1984, and eventually it became what I'm going to share with you today, which is something I think is desperately needed in a world where we don't know who we are anymore. So even though it came at that time, I feel like prophetically it was given for this time in human history, and it can answer a lot of those difficult questions. It makes what the Catholic Church, let me rephrase that, it makes what God himself in the incarnation and the person of Jesus Christ revealed in natural law and morality that the church has been asked to safeguard and have fidelity to in the magisterium, that's the teaching authority of the church, and hand on from one generation to the next, unadulterated, adding nothing to it and taking nothing away from it. The church doesn't teach this stuff. God himself taught this stuff. And it's been entrusted to the church to be handed on from one generation to the next. The creatures that we are do not get to tell the Creator about creation. That's arrogant. I was one of those people for a long time. Christ came so we could conform to him, not so that he could conform to us, because he's the Creator and we're the creature. And this became crystal clear for me when I studied theology of the body. Your body, your body, soul composite. It says something about you, it says something about the world, and it says something about the church. And most importantly, it says something about God. So when somebody looks at theology of the body, it's looking to meet that big hole we have in our life that we all try to fill with everything but God and we're never satisfied with. Matthew Kelly says we have a God-sized hole and we try to fill it with everything but God. So as I said, what does it mean to be human? How do I act according to my nature? You were designed for a specific purpose. Your body in its design shows you were made for communion. Why? Because God in his essence is a communion of three persons that infinitely share and possess fully a self-giving love that produces life, both biologically and spiritually. And we cooperate with God in that. Theology of the body reveals that. How do you find your fulfillment in life as a person? Male or female, he created them. How do you find your fulfillment in your humanity? And why you are a unique body-soul composite. In my opinion, he should already be a saint. Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who is now blessed, once said, "There's not a single era of history which is not a perversion of the mystery of body-soul unity." So the Catholic Church is diabolically opposed to a dualistic approach to the human person. So secular atheists will tell you, you're nothing but a cosmic accident, And materialism is what's important today, and that's all you need to know. You don't have an immortal soul. So secularism will give you everything you need to meet the needs of your body and your body alone. Protestant Christianity, not Protestants, Protestant Christianity and theology, which is a half-truth and built on a lie, a man-made lie created by a 16th century disgruntled Catholic priest who created a false notion of scripture alone and faith alone. Will give you everything you need spiritually, won't give you everything you need for your body. The Catholic Church, which is the fullness of truth, the church established by Jesus Christ, has everything you need in your fulfillment and your humanity because it gives you something for both body and soul. That's what theology of the body does. So there's this program, it's called the U program. It's put out by Ascension Press. It's a high school program, but I've used it when I've done things with grown-ups or adults. And if you can get your hands on it, I have copies of it at my office if you want to check it out. We rent stuff out, and there's plenty of access to it. And I've done quite a few catechetical programs on theology of the body, and I really would like to see this take off in our diocese. It needs to take off in our diocese. This is what your young kids need before they enter into that time period in their life where they're getting bombarded with all these things I've been talking about earlier. And we have the answer in the Catholic Church. We just don't know how to articulate it because we're not comfortable doing it. So what this does is give you a language and an ability to have those deep, difficult conversations with young people and help them see that God did not make a mistake. They have a female or a male soul. The material cause is their body, the matter. They're made of matter and spirit, a body-soul composite. The efficient cause for their existence came from you and their mother coming together and cooperating with God to bring about new life, which reflects the inner life of the Trinity, and that their final purpose is to know God, to love God, to serve God, and be with God for all eternity. And if they pursue anything else other than that, they will not be fulfilled. And it's okay as a man to say that. So what John Paul II does, I'm going to give a brief overview here, then I'm going to give you a witness about how this impacted my marriage. He breaks down the history of man into 3 periods, okay? Original man, historical man, and eschatological man. That's a big fancy theological word. All it means is the end times, what we're all destined for. We're in this play, right? And you and I, we fell into we're born into Act 2 of the play. We're born after the fall. But what John Paul says is that in each human person, male or female, there's this echo, which is what I have up here. When I sat down with those men at that table from St. Thomas More, they asked me, who are you and who is God? And it was deer in the headlights because my whole life, all I could ever identify to somebody when they asked me who I was what I did. Well, I was a basketball player when I was younger. Well, I lost that. Then I became the guy with the pretty girl on his arm when I was in the fraternity. I got a fraternity brother here today. And if I didn't have that, who was I? Did I have any value, worth, belonging, or autonomy in my life as a human person? What if that went away tomorrow? You heard Father Schumacher say all these things about that I've accomplished. That's not who I am. That's what I've done. My value and my worth doesn't come from that. And I know that. But when I didn't know that, I was insecure when I wasn't receiving love, when I didn't feel like I belonged, when I didn't feel like I had something that set me apart from everybody else, because then I didn't have any value. And I began to act out, and I began to identify myself by my sin. And the gift that Father Joe Bro gave me, and the gift that goes along with this, is that we have this echo inside of us. When we're at that point in our life, we can look back and realize that, you know what? We might have lost the preternatural gifts that we were supposed to have when Adam and Eve fell in the garden, but there's still an echo of that in our mind. And when you go back to the garden, right? In Genesis 1, John Paul talks about, and in Genesis 2, it says original solitude. Adam was created first, right? And he was created all by his what? All by himself. And he's there, and in original solitude, he recognizes he's in union with God. And that's where his real fulfillment is coming from. But there's all these other created things around him in the garden. And he gets to name them, and he's longing to have that communion he has with God, with the physical world. But he's looking around at all the animals, and none of them are like him. Animals are not like humans. You know, we're not the same species. It's not like a different degree of species. It's a difference of kind of species. You have a rational soul with an intellect and a will. You can come to know what's true, good, and beautiful. And you can choose to will the true, the good, and the beautiful for yourself, and more importantly, for the person next to you. Animals can't do that. And he looked at his body, didn't even know he was a man, and knew that it was made for communion, but there was no physical, material thing for him to be in communion with. So what does God do? In that original unity, in that original longing, God puts Adam to sleep, right? And when he puts God to sleep, when he puts Adam to sleep, what does he do? He takes a rib from Adam's side, right? And what does he create? He creates a woman, right? Creates Eve. And if you see here that scripture quote, Matthew chapter 19, verse 3 through 8, that's when the Pharisees and the Sadducees went up to Jesus and they said, is it lawful to divorce your wife? Well, what did Moses tell you? Moses gave a bill of divorce, and he said, well, Moses allowed that because of the hardness of your heart, but from the beginning it was not so. He made them male and female, and that is why a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. The indissolubility of marriage. So he creates a woman, right, as our companion. And now, in that one flesh union you have in that marriage, you see the inner life of the Trinity. A communion within a union of three persons who infinitely share a self-giving love that creates life. You have a lover, God the Father, a beloved, God the Son, and their exchange of love that creates a new person. Everybody in here, if you have a child, has experienced this within your marriage. You are the lover, your wife is the beloved, and you become one, and your love becomes so real that 9 months later you give it a name. And it's walking around. And you give your life for it, if you're anything like me. That's a visible sign of the invisible reality of God's self-giving love in the world, and it's under attack right now. And the only thing that's going to respond to it is an authentic witness. And of course, with those preternatural gifts, we didn't see people as people to be used, we saw people as people to be loved. Because the union that you have with your spouse, or the union that Father already has with God in his celibacy, points to the union each one of us is destined for in our death with God for all eternity. So there's a spousal analogy within the Trinity. There's a spousal analogy within family. There's a spousal analogy between Jesus Christ and the church, his mystical body on earth, his bride, he the bridegroom, the church the bride. And that's a reciprocal love that's poured out in the world to bring life. But then the fall came, right? The fall came, and we lost this. John Paul II quotes Gaudium et Spes, it's a Vatican II document. Man cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself. We don't recognize our manhood or find our fulfillment in life until we give our life away, like Christ gave his life away completely on the cross, for the benefit of other, not for self. Until you do that, you'll never be fulfilled. You'll always be chasing one pleasurable thing after the next that never satisfies you. I got to make a little more money. I got to get another trophy. I got to do this. I got to do that. Never fulfills you, right? It's always the next thing. And when Eve is created, she affirms for Adam his masculinity, and he confirms for her her femininity. And then the fall comes, and you enter the period of historical man, which is the one you and I are in right now. We forgot who we are. We're like Simba in The Lion King. We went into the elephant graveyard. We didn't listen to our dad because we didn't trust him. He was going to give us what he promised to give us. We were going to take it on our own. And then we start wandering around trying to find everybody else to tell us who we are because we forgot who we are. And if we don't know who we are as the spiritual head of a house, because Catholicism and Christianity is patriarchal. You're supposed to be the spiritual leader of your house, not your wife. And the temptation of Adam in the garden was to, instead of doing the difficult thing, which Jesus did in another garden 2,000 years later, laying his life down for his bride, he stepped aside and allowed Eve to take the bullet. And Eve's temptation in the garden was feminism, to usurp the rightly spiritual authority that Adam had in the garden and take it from him and confront the serpent on her own. And men and women have been battling that within one another ever since. Think about your marriage, think about your girlfriend, think about your relationship with your wife. What do you argue about? It's an unwillingness to trust God and to submit, right, to what he has designed for us. We think we know better. I thought I knew better for a long time. So after the fall, instead of seeing Eve as a gift to be given and a gift to be received, Eve became someone to be used for personal gratification. Should we just love people and use things? But I know there's been times in my life, if I'm honest with you, I have used people and loved things. And that's the consequence of concupiscence. A tendency we have within ourselves to choose ourselves, to choose sin instead of choosing the good of the person next to us. Paul writes about this in Romans 7:15. I do not do the good I want, I do the bad I do not want to do. I don't know why I do it, but I do it anyway. I do not do the good I want. I do the bad I do not want to do, and I don't know why I do it, but I do it anyway. Anybody in here ever had that happen? You've done something in 5 minutes later, you feel like, man, I shouldn't have done that. Welcome to humanity. That's the consequence of sin. We tend to put other people ahead of ourselves. And for me as a guy, when I went into marriage, I didn't understand what authentic love was, because I went into marriage thinking, what am I going to get out of this? Instead of realizing that to find fulfillment in my marriage, I had to go in my marriage with the attitude of, what am I going to give to this? Then I will be fulfilled.
St. Thomas Aquinas defines effeminacy as an unwillingness to suffer due to a disordered attachment to pleasure. Being the spiritual leader of one's home, laying down one's life on a daily basis for those whose eternal destiny have been entrusted into your hands, and making the decision each day to accept and make that sacrifice, it takes sanctifying grace. A grace that is available to every man in the sacrament of holy matrimony. Exorcist and priest Father Chad Ripberger states, the real man is a man of virtue. With virtue comes interior self-discipline and self-control. These are his hallmarks. He can engage in things that are hard and arduous and still remain steadfast. A man who wilts is effeminate. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Catechetical Corner. And join us next time as we close out this 2-part special on theology of the body for men, authentic Catholic masculinity. God love you, and we'll see you next time.